On the day of the wedding dress fitting, the photographer told me to move aside. She said I was blocking the bride's light. I looked down at the white gown I was wearing and suddenly smiled. So, this wedding never needed me from the start. Then I won't go. I stood on the circular wooden fitting platform. The wood under my feet was a little cold. The 4 spotlights above shone directly onto my face. The light was harsh, and I squinted slightly. Mary, the seamstress, knelt on the red carpet. She held a pink sewing kit in her hand and a silver pin between her teeth. Her left hand smoothed the lace on my hem, while her right hand pushed the pin into the fabric. She repeated this motion, shifting her knee across the carpet each time. Mark sat on the dark green velvet sofa in the corner. Between the fingers of his right hand, he held a transparent wine glass, half filled with pale, yellow champagne. His left hand held his phone, his thumb constantly scrolling up the screen. He wore a dark blue suit today, his tie hanging loosely around his neck. Chloe held up a heavy black SLR camera. She wore white canvas shoes and ripped jeans. She paced back and forth on the wooden floor, searching for the right angle. The soles of her shoes squeaked against the floorboards. "Mark, look at the camera," Chloe called out. Mark looked up. Chloe pressed the shutter. The flash went off. Mark smiled. He set the wine glass down on the small round wooden table beside him, the glass base tapping lightly against the wood. Chloe walked directly in front of Mark. She bent down and held the camera screen up to his face. "The light is a bit dim," Chloe said. "You're too close," Mark replied. His face was only inches from hers. He reached out and tapped the camera screen with his finger. Chloe straightened up. She lowered the camera. She reached her right hand to a nearby display table and picked up a long veil with pearl edges. She raised the veil with both hands and pinned it into her brown curly hair. The veil draped down, covering her shoulders. Chloe raised the camera again. Her right eye pressed against the viewfinder. She took 2 steps to the left, aiming the lens in mine and Mark's direction. "Evelyn, move aside a bit," Chloe said. Her voice rang out clearly in the quiet fitting room. "You're blocking the bride's light." I stopped breathing. Mary's hand froze midair. The pin fell onto the carpet with a soft click. I turned my head. I looked at Mark. Mark placed his phone face down on the armrest of the sofa. He stared at Chloe. The corners of his mouth pulled upward into a smile. He reached out his right hand, pinched the edge of Chloe's veil between his index and middle fingers, and gave it a gentle tug. "This light falls perfectly on you," Mark said to Chloe. I lowered my head. I looked at the heavy white satin fabric with its long train wrapped around my waist. The lace edges trailed on the floor. I reached both hands behind my back. My fingers found the cold silver zipper. I pulled it down hard. The zipper made a harsh sound. Mary stood up abruptly. I stepped out of the dress. The white wedding gown fell onto the wooden floor in a heap. I walked barefoot into the inner changing room. I took off the tight undergarments. I pulled on my blue jeans and gray sweater. I bent down, tightened the laces on my sneakers with both hands, and tied a double knot. I pushed open the changing room door and walked out. Mark and Chloe stood side by side in front of the camera screen. Mark's left shoulder touched Chloe's right shoulder. Their heads were close together. I walked over to the glass coffee table. My brown leather tote bag was sitting there. I grabbed the edges of the bag with both hands and yanked the zipper open. I reached both hands into the bag and pulled out a heavy black folder. The folder weighed at least 3 pounds. Gold lettering was embossed on the cover. Inside were 100 pages of contract documents. This contained the entire agreement for the wedding. The destination was a remote stone island 60 miles off the coastline. The planner was Giselle, a notorious control freak from Los Angeles. Page 3 of the contract stated in bold black letters, absolutely no refunds, absolutely no date changes. All pre-wedding meetings must be attended by all parties on time, and a 10-minute lateness would incur a hefty fine. The final payment had been fully settled at 10 o'clock yesterday morning. I held the black folder in both hands. I raised it into the air, then let go. A loud thud echoed as the folder slammed onto the glass coffee table. Mark's shoulder jerked violently. The wine glass in his hand tilted, spilling pale yellow champagne onto his suit pants. Chloe looked up. The pearl veil on her head had slipped to the left. "You two look perfect together," I said. I extended my right index finger, pointing at the black folder on the coffee table.
"Take it."
"The entire wedding is yours." Mark pulled a white tissue from his pocket. He vigorously wiped the water stain on his pant leg. "Evelyn, what are you talking about? We were just testing the camera's exposure settings." "I'm completely serious," I said. I reached out with both hands and slid the heavy folder forward across the glass tabletop. The edge of the folder stopped just in front of Chloe's canvas shoes. "Island venue. Dinner by a Michelin chef. Giselle's planning team. All expenses are already paid. You can simply take my place." Chloe's eyes widened. Her gaze was fixed on the black leather cover. We had discussed the price of this package at the cafe last week. She knew exactly how much money was involved. I watched Chloe's fingers hovering over the gold lettering. I took a step forward, standing directly in front of her. "Open the first page and see for yourself," I said. Chloe bit her lower lip. She lifted the black leather cover. On the first page was a red seal, next to a long string of zeros. "The venue has 3 private beaches for heated pools," I said, looking into Chloe's eyes. "The dinner menu includes air-flown French oysters and Kobe beef. Giselle will arrange a 7-camera photography team for you. All you have to do is put on the wedding dress and stand there." Chloe swallowed. Her throat moved visibly. She turned her head to glance at Mark. Mark's brows were furrowed. He reached out and pressed his hand on the edge of the folder. "Evelyn, have you lost your mind? You've been planning this wedding for an entire year." "Yes," I nodded. I looked Mark in the eye. "So now I'm giving it to someone more suitable." I extended my left hand and flipped to the 12th page of the contract. I pointed at the dense fine print. "But there's one thing you need to be aware of," I said. I ran my fingernail across the paper. "Giselle has extremely high standards for weddings. The contract states that to ensure the wedding's quality, for the next 3 months, you must attend meetings at her studio every Tuesday at 6 in the morning. Every Thursday at 8 in the evening, you'll have tasting sessions. Every detail must be executed strictly according to her plan." Mark stared at the spot my nail had traced. "These terms are insane. Who has time to follow all this?" "That's the rule of a top-tier planner," I replied. I closed the folder with a crisp snap. "The penalty for breach is 3 times the total cost. Moreover, if any unexpected incident disrupts the proceedings on the wedding day, the responsible party must pay additional compensation for reputational damage. These documents are already signed. All you have to do is sign your names on the transfer agreement now, and all of this is immediately yours." I took a black pen from my bag. I removed the cap and placed it on top of the folder. Chloe immediately reached out and grabbed the pen. "Evelyn." Chloe's eyes were gleaming. "Are you really willing to give this opportunity to me?" "Of course," I said, watching the pen tightly clenched in Chloe's hand. Her knuckles were white from the force. Mark grabbed Chloe's wrist. "Chloe, put the pen down. Evelyn is playing mind games. She just wants to force an apology out of me." I didn't respond to Mark. I zipped up my tote bag. "The pen is yours," I said. "The transfer agreement is on the last page. Once you sign it, send it directly to Giselle." I turned around and pushed open the glass door. The sound of car horns from the Beverly Hills streets immediately rushed into my ears. I stepped onto the gray concrete sidewalk. I didn't look back at anything happening behind the glass door. I walked straight down the street. My shoes crunched over fallen leaves. I reached my black car. I pressed the unlock button on the key fob. I opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. The car merged into traffic. I turned the air conditioning to its highest setting. Cold air blew against my face. I pulled the car into a roadside parking spot. I picked up my phone. I opened my email. I found Giselle's work email address. I clicked compose. In the body of the email, I typed, "Dear Giselle, my wedding will be taken over by Chloe as the bride. The venue and package remain entirely unchanged. Mark and Chloe will fully comply with all the terms in the contract. The transfer agreement will be mailed shortly." I clicked send. Then, I opened my bank's mobile app. I found the joint credit card specifically used for wedding expenses. I clicked freeze this card. A green checkmark appeared on the screen. After finishing these tasks, I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat. I pressed the accelerator again. The car headed toward my apartment. I parked my car in the parking spot beneath my apartment building. I pulled out the keys, pushed open the car door, and stepped onto the gray concrete ground. I walked up to the third floor, inserted the brass key into the lock, and turned it halfway to the right. The lock clicked. I pushed the door open. I went straight to the bedroom, bent down, and pulled a black hardshell suitcase from under the bed. I laid it flat on the blue carpet, unzipped it, and walked to the closet to take down my coat, trousers, and shirts. I folded them neatly and placed them inside the suitcase. Then, I went to the bathroom, packed my toothbrush, facial cleanser, and towel into a clear plastic bag, and tucked it into a corner of the suitcase. The sound of a key turning came from the front door. It opened, followed by hurried footsteps on the wooden floor of the living room. Mark and Chloe walked into the living room. Mark held his phone tightly in his hand, the screen glowing. Chloe's hair was slightly disheveled, and her canvas shoes brushed the edge of the carpet. Mark pressed his thumb against the phone screen and switched to speakerphone. A woman's voice came through the phone's speaker, loud and rapid. It was unmistakably Giselle's voice. Mark, I received the transfer agreement. Chloe's measurements are completely off. The original lighting plan is useless now. You both must be at my Beverly Hills studio tomorrow morning at 5 sharp. We need to recalculate all the camera angles. Mark raised the phone to his mouth. Giselle, 5 a.m. is too early. I have an extremely important board meeting at the company at 9. Can we reschedule for the weekend? The sound of rustling papers came through the phone. Giselle's voice turned colder and sharper. Mark, refer to clause 3 on page 4 of the contract. Any delay in pre-wedding preparation meetings incurs a penalty of $5,000 per hour. You're asking to postpone until the weekend, which is 72 hours later. Are you prepared to pay a penalty of $360,000? Mark's mouth fell open. He turned to look at Chloe. Chloe's hands were clenched together, her nails digging red marks into the back of her hands. We'll be there on time, Chloe shouted into the phone. 5 a.m., no delays. Good. The expedited fee for revising the invitation names and adjusting the lighting parameters has been sent to your email. It's $8,500. Pay it before sunset today. Giselle hung up directly. Mark threw his phone onto the black leather sofa, where it bounced once. He turned and saw me standing at the bedroom door, my right hand gripping the suitcase handle. Mark took a step forward, his leather shoes thudding heavily on the wooden floor. Evelyn, you deliberately left this mess for us. You knew Giselle has extremely strict rules. I met Mark's eyes and pulled the suitcase handle upward, the metal locking into place with a click. The documents bear your own signatures. You wanted the wedding, and I gave it to you exactly as it was, along with all the premium services. Chloe walked over to Mark and wrapped her arm around his. Mark, ignore her. It's just $8,500. We can afford it. Mark took out a black leather wallet from the inner pocket of his suit and pulled out a silver credit card with his fingers, the one linked to my name. He picked up his phone from the sofa, opened the email with the invoice link, and entered the 14-digit number from the silver card. He pressed the green Confirm Payment button. A spinning circle appeared on the screen. 2 seconds later, the screen turned red, and a white exclamation mark popped up with the message, Payment failed. This card has been frozen. Mark looked up at me, his chest heaving. I dragged the suitcase toward the front door, the wheels rumbling softly on the wooden floor. I stopped in front of Mark. My wedding is canceled, so of course the card is frozen. You took over the wedding, so the expenses are naturally your responsibility, I said, glancing at the silver card in Mark's hand. Chloe gritted her teeth and looked at Mark. Mark, use your card. We can't let Giselle laugh at us. Mark took a deep breath, tucked the silver card back into his wallet, and pulled out a blue one. He re-entered the numbers on the phone screen and pressed the green button again. The screen turned red once more. Damn it, Mark cursed, gripping his phone tightly. Chloe leaned in to look at the screen. What's wrong? Your card has money in it. The bank's risk control system flagged it. This $8,500 charge, combined with the deduction from the bridal shop, triggered a security alert, Mark said through gritted teeth. He dialed the bank's customer service number and switched to speakerphone. The phone played an endless hold music. Chloe began pacing back and forth in the living room, her canvas shoes scraping against the wooden floor with each step. 3 minutes later, a male customer service representative answered. "Good afternoon. This is Chase Bank. How may I assist you today?" "My card has been restricted. I just tried to make an $8,500 payment. It was a normal purchase. Please lift the restriction immediately." Mark spoke rapidly. "Certainly, sir. For the security of your account, I need to verify a few details. May I have your mother's maiden name?" the representative asked. Mark provided a name. "Thank you. Next question. Last Tuesday, there was a purchase of $3,200 at a jewelry store. Can you confirm this was made by you?" The representative's voice was crystal clear. The living room fell silent instantly. Chloe stopped dead in her tracks. She turned her head, staring intently at Mark. "What jewelry? You didn't give me anything last week." Mark's Adam's apple bobbed. He covered the phone's microphone with his hand. "Chloe, that was a necklace I bought to appease Evelyn. I forgot to return it." I stood by the front door, my hand resting on the handle of my suitcase. I watched Chloe's face flush red, then turn pale. "You used my time to buy her a necklace?" Chloe's voice rose sharply. "I need to unlock this card to pay Giselle's bill right now. Can we argue about this later?" Mark snapped at Chloe. He removed his hand from the microphone. "Yes, that purchase was mine. Please lift the restriction." "Very well, sir. Your card has been restored. Have a pleasant day." The representative hung up. Mark clicked the payment link again. This time, a green checkmark appeared on the screen. Chloe crossed her arms over her chest. She turned her head, staring at the pattern on the carpet, her lips pressed tightly together. I walked past them to the front door. I reached out with my right hand, pressed down on the handle, and pushed the door open. Stepping outside, I grabbed the door frame and pulled the door shut with force. The lock clicked into place. I carried my suitcase down the stairs, placed it in the trunk of my car, and got into the driver's seat. Starting the engine, I drove to a hotel downtown. Handing my keys to the valet, I walked to the front desk and presented my ID and credit card. The receptionist handed me a white key card. I took the elevator to the 12th floor and swiped the card to open the room door. I set my suitcase in the corner, took off my coat, and hung it on the rack. Walking to the floor-to-ceiling window, I looked out at the streets of Los Angeles. Cars stretched in long lines, their red taillights flickering. I moved to the white bed and picked up my phone. The screen lit up, showing a new email from Giselle's assistant. I opened the email. It read, "Dear Evelyn, the transfer procedures have been completed. As the original signatory guarantor of the contract, per California tax regulations, we will copy you on all subsequent billing statements for record-keeping purposes." Below the email was a PDF attachment. I tapped to open it. The file name read, "Chloe and Mark, 90-day countdown extreme preparation schedule." I scrolled down with my finger. 4 a.m. tomorrow. Wake-up call confirmation. 5 a.m. tomorrow. Arrive at the studio for a 3-hour, all-angle lighting test. Requirement: absolutely no water intake to prevent facial swelling. 9 a.m. tomorrow. Chloe's first physical training session. Activity: balancing an 8-pound sandbag on her head, wearing 5-inch heels, and walking a straight line on a wooden board for 2 hours. 12 p.m. tomorrow. Mark's private meeting. Agenda: review the BMI of Mark's groomsmen. Those exceeding the limit must enroll in Giselle's designated paid weight loss camp. 11 p.m. the day after tomorrow. First full course tasting. Requirement: after consuming 4 main courses, immediately rehearse a 30-minute waltz to test stomach endurance. I looked at the dense black text and continued scrolling. The schedule spanned 30 pages, every day packed with activities. Each violation was followed by a specific dollar amount for fines. I placed my phone on the nightstand and walked into the bathroom. Turning on the faucet, I let warm water gather in the white, ceramic sink. Cupping my hands, I splashed water on my face, then grabbed a white towel to dry off. Leaving the bathroom, I drew the curtains, pulled back the covers, and lay down on the soft mattress. Closing my eyes, I knew I could sleep soundly here until 5 tomorrow morning. Tuesday, 4:30 a.m. My alarm went off. I reached out and turned it off. Outside the window, Los Angeles was still dark, the sky a deep blue. I rolled over and pulled the blanket tighter. Right now, Mark and Chloe should be on their way to the Beverly studio. I opened my phone and clicked on the shared schedule. Their first task was arrive at 5 a.m. sharp for a 3-hour lighting test. This was precisely the time when the higher-ups at Mark's company would start reviewing project progress. I pressed the call button and dialed Mark's project manager, my former supervisor, David. "David, hello?" I said, looking at the streetlights outside the window. "There are a few details about the North Shore project that Mark is handling that I need to remind you about." David sounded surprised. "Evelyn, isn't that project entirely under Mark's responsibility now? You're on leave." "Mark might be too busy," I said. I walked to the desk, opened my laptop, and sent the sloppy budget draft Mark had sent me yesterday to David's email. He might not have noticed a few critical logic errors in the budget, especially regarding logistics. If the project proceeds with this budget, next week's delivery will run into major issues. David fell silent for a few seconds on the other end. The sound of mouse clicks followed. "Goodness, Evelyn. This is a mess. The numbers don't add up at all. Where's Mark? Why didn't he catch this?" "Mark's schedule is a bit packed right now," I said. "He's probably dealing with some personal matters." I hung up the phone. I pulled back the curtains and watched the traffic on street. At that very moment, at Giselle's studio, Mark sat on a cold, hard metal stool. He hadn't had a drink of water in 4 hours. His throat burned with pain. Chloe stood 2 meters away, balancing a heavy sandbag on her head and wearing a tight practice outfit. Her legs trembled. Giselle, dressed in a black professional suit, held a long measuring tape. She circled Chloe once. "Shift your center of gravity 2 inches to the left," Giselle commanded coldly. "Your neck is too stiff. You look like a robot, not a bride." Mark glanced at his watch. It was already 9 a.m. His phone vibrated in his pocket. It was David calling. He couldn't answer. Giselle had a strict rule: no personal communication during sessions. "Giselle, I have to take this call." Mark stood up. His movement was abrupt, and the stool screeched loudly against the wooden floor. Giselle looked up. Her eyes were sharp as a hawk's. "If you walk out that door now, the penalty clause in Article 10 of the contract will be triggered. Are you sure about this?" Mark clenched his fists. He looked at the vibrating phone, then at Chloe, her face drenched in sweat. Chloe turned her head, her eyes pleading with him. "I'll take it and be right back," Mark said, then turned and hurried into the hallway. He ran to the restroom at the end of the hall, closed the door, and locked it. He answered the call. "Mark, what are you doing?" David's voice echoed sharply in the small restroom. "There's a major issue with the project budget. The client just called my office directly, demanding an immediate revision. If you're not in the conference room in 10 minutes, I'll have to hand your position over to someone else." Mark stared at his reflection in the mirror. His eyes were bloodshot, his face covered in stubble. His shirt was soaked through from the earlier practice. "David, give me an hour. I have something here that I absolutely must finish." Mark's voice trembled. "Now means now," David said coldly. "If you're not here in 10 minutes, don't bother coming back." The call ended. Mark slammed his phone onto the tiled sink. The screen instantly cracked into a web of lines. He rubbed his face with both hands, trying to clear his head, then pushed the door open and ran back to the studio. He rushed back to the training room, panting. Without anyone to support her balance, the sandbag on Chloe's head fell to the floor with a heavy thud. "Mark, you're late." Giselle stood there, holding a stopwatch. "According to the contract, you were absent for 5 minutes. A $3,000 delay fee has been added to today's bill. Additionally, Chloe dropping the sandbag is a major etiquette breach, a $1,000 fine." Chloe picked up the sandbag. Sweat had streaked her foundation, leaving 2 pale lines on her face. "Mark, what were you doing?" Was that call important? Mark looked at Giselle, then at Chloe. There's a problem at the company. David is pulling me off the project. Chloe whirled around. What? Our entire wedding bill is being paid by your bonus. You have to go to the company and sort this out now. But if I leave now, it's another $3,000. Mark roared, his voice echoing through the empty studio. Giselle leisurely pulled a tablet from her pocket. Add another $2,000 for disrupting the training with your earlier argument. So, shall we continue? Chloe threw the sandbag in her hand to the ground. She stared at Mark. When Evelyn was with you, there was never this kind of mess. What on earth are you doing now? Mark's eyes widened. He took a step forward. You're the one who insisted on taking over this wedding. You're the one who insisted on being the bride. Their voices grew louder. Giselle stood to the side, a faint smile curling at the corner of her mouth. She pressed the remote in her hand, turning up the background music. Heavy beats instantly filled the room, drowning out their argument. I lay in the soft hotel bedding, listening to the text notification on my phone. It was an instant status update from Giselle. Couples cooperation score, extremely low. Penalty item, argument disrupting work, deducted. I rolled over, looking at the ceiling. Mark wasn't just losing those few $1,000s. He was losing the last shred of credibility he had in David's eyes. I pulled the covers over my head and closed my eyes. That night, I slept soundly. On Wednesday morning, Los Angeles sunlight streamed through the office blinds, casting long, slender shadows on the floor. I sat in my private office, the computer screen displaying the progress tracking chart for the North Shore project. Next to Mark's name, a red warning marker flashed, behind schedule. Hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway. David pushed open my door, holding a thick file, his expression grim. Evelyn, the client for the North Shore project, called again. They're demanding Mark submit the final revised proposal immediately. If he can't produce something acceptable, they'll terminate the contract. I looked up from the screen and took the file. Flipping through a few pages, I pointed to a data chart. Mark's submitted logistics costs are 20% higher than our projections. Of course, the client is furious. He completely missed the point. David rubbed his temples. If you could take over this project, I could reallocate resources immediately. I have a responsibility to help the company resolve this issue. I stood up, straightening my clothes. I'll go talk to the client. Meanwhile, in the private studio in Beverly Hills, the atmosphere was as heavy as an impending storm. Mark stood before the projector. His shirt collar was soaked with sweat, his hair disheveled. He had been working for 30 hours straight, sustained only by a few shots of espresso. Chloe sat in a chair nearby, flipping through bill after bill, her face pale with anger. Mark, you have to fix this with the client, Chloe said without looking up. Giselle just sent another message. We have to pay the next installment deposit tomorrow. If you lose that project, how are we going to pay? Mark didn't answer. He stared at the data on the screen, his eyes vacant. His phone lay on the table, silent. David had already cut off his access to the work email. I'm talking to you. Chloe suddenly stood up, slamming the bills onto the table. Shut up, Mark yelled, his voice hoarse as if grating on sandpaper. He braced his hands on the table, knuckles white. I'm trying to figure it out. Do you think I don't want to? Giselle pushed the door open and walked in, holding a tape measure. She glanced at the two of them, her tone flat. 5-minute break is over. Next is the emotional connection and posture coordination session. Please display the perfect affection for the camera. Mark was forced back in front of the camera. He looked into the lens, that black eye staring back at him. He needed to smile, but he couldn't muster an expression. Mark, there's no love in your eyes, Giselle commented coldly. If this continues, all of today's footage will be scrapped. Remember, scrapped footage means additional reshoot fees. Mark stared fixedly at the lens, his mind in chaos. He remembered the days of seamless collaboration with me in the office, how I calmly checked every detail of his data. That composure was gone now, replaced by penalties ticking away every second. He suddenly realized that in this confined space, he had not only lost his job but all control over his own life. At that moment, I was sitting in the client's conference room. The client representative, a woman around 50, looked at the optimization proposal I had handed her and gave a slight nod. Evelyn, this plan is much more reasonable. Mark's previous approach was a disaster. Mark has probably been too busy lately, I said with a calm smile. He didn't focus on the logical structure of the contract. He won't be in charge of this project anymore. The client representative closed the file and looked up at me. The company's board just informed me that they've decided to replace the project lead. I walked out of the conference room and took out my phone. I opened the wedding preparation checklist that had been automatically forwarded to me all along. I looked at the numbers on it. To reshoot the footage that had been scrapped that morning, Giselle had added a $4,000 fee. Mark's account must already be on the verge of overdraft. He thought he was pursuing a new life, but he had no idea he was stepping into a chain of abysses. As long as he remained in that studio, as long as he remained fixated on that wedding, he would be torn apart by every fine, every shot. I put my phone back in my bag and turned toward the elevator. I didn't look back, and there was no need to. The wedding countdown had entered its final week. The air in Los Angeles was dry and stifling. I sat in a motel not far from the wedding venue. On my computer screen was the live surveillance feed Giselle had sent me, a camera positioned at the perimeter of the venue. On the screen, Mark stood in front of the massive wedding sign bearing his and Chloe's names. He held a tape measure, trying to gauge a specific angle. His face was covered in a fine layer of sweat. His shirt collar had yellowed, and the cuffs were badly worn. Chloe stood behind him. She wore an oversized gray hoodie meant to conceal her severely emaciated frame from long, intense training. She stared at her phone, muttering curses under her breath. Giselle's team members, dressed in black uniforms, moved briskly around them. Each carried thick folders. Whenever Mark or Chloe paused to catch their breath, someone would immediately approach them with a timer. In the surveillance feed, Mark stopped what he was doing. He seemed to be on the verge of a breakdown. He slammed the tape measure onto the wooden platform. The board let out a sharp crack, and the tape measure rolled into the grass. He strode toward the nearby food truck, where Giselle's team had prepared a special wedding meal, sugar-free, carb-free. He picked up a plate, glanced at the lettuce leaves and shriveled pieces of chicken breast, and flipped it onto the ground. I quit. Mark shouted into the empty venue. This has no end. Chloe looked up from her phone. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the air. You're backing out now? What about the penalty fees? Mark, look at your bank account. You're already broke. Mark turned and walked step by step toward Chloe. The distance between them closed. They swayed in the strong wind. Chloe didn't back away. She pulled a piece of paper from her pocket, a demand for payment Giselle had just sent. Look at this. Chloe pressed the note against Mark's face. This is the venue cleaning fee. And that's not even counting tomorrow's lighting adjustment fee. Are you going to keep throwing a tantrum? I watched the screen and clicked the zoom button. The muscles in Mark's face trembled. He snatched the note from Chloe's hand, crumpled it into a ball, and hurled it to the ground. Just then, a Giselle assistant in a black uniform approached. She held a tray with several new supplementary agreements. Mr. Mark, Miss Chloe, the assistant said expressionlessly. Due to your breach of contract today, the venue usage time needs to be extended. Please sign these agreements and pay the additional expedited processing fee. The assistant held a golden pen. She waited. Mark stared at the pen. Chloe stared at the contract. Their movements froze. Their postures were almost comical. Mark was hunched over, his tie dangling like a puppet drained of strength. Chloe's hair, unwashed for too long, clung together, emitting a sour smell. Mark didn't take the pen. He raised a trembling hand and pointed at the assistant's nose. You're bleeding me dry. All of you are bleeding me dry. You sign the contract yourself, the assistant replied calmly. Now, please sign. Chloe suddenly laughed, a dry, grating sound. She shoved Mark aside, snatched the pen, and swiftly signed her name on the document. I'll sign. Chloe looked up at the assistant. I'll sign, and then I can finally get this damn wedding over with, right? The assistant took the signed document, checked it, nodded, and walked away. Mark looked at Chloe, his eyes growing distant, and unfamiliar. He lowered his head, staring at the thick stack of bills, then at his own hands. Suddenly, he crouched down, searching the ground for the measuring tape he had thrown away earlier. His movements were slow. On the surveillance screen, they looked like two prey trapped in a snare, devoid of any dignity, any sparkle. I closed my laptop. My phone vibrated, an email from Giselle. Wedding preparations have entered the final stage. All components have triggered the no withdrawal permitted mechanism. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the brilliant California sunshine. All of this began simply because that day in the bridal shop, I chose to give up my spot for them. Now, they were finally standing in that position. I opened my backpack and took out my car keys. Pushing the door open, I walked to the parking lot. I started the car and revved the engine. I didn't drive toward the wedding venue. Instead, I turned the car around and headed to a cafe 3 blocks away. I was going to meet Mark's former colleague, the one who had helped him with his resignation procedures. Some debts always have to be settled. I parked the car and walked into the cafe. Mark's former colleague was sitting by the window. He saw me and waved. I sat down. Without a word, I placed a folder on the table containing evidence of Mark's unauthorized use of company funds. "This is what you wanted," I said. He took the folder and opened it. Mark never imagined he'd be brought down by his own wedding planner and now completely abandoned by the company. He just chose the wrong path, I said, watching the steam rise from my coffee cup. Some things he'll have to face the consequences sooner or later. I paid the bill and walked out of the cafe. The weather outside was still beautiful. I knew that tomorrow, at the wedding venue they considered the pinnacle of their lives, those consequences would come knocking one by one. As I drove, I passed the entrance to the venue. I didn't slow down. In the rearview mirror, the sign grew smaller and smaller. The placard bearing their names swayed precariously in the wind. I merged into the flow of traffic on the highway. Looking ahead, the road was wide and smooth. On the day of the wedding, the sunlight was blinding. I wore a simple white dress and sat in the very last row of the guest area. It was empty, not a soul in sight. All the expensive decorations still stood there, but without any people, they looked eerily out of place. The tall floral arrangements swayed in the wind, creaking and groaning. Mark stood at the altar. He wore a rented suit, the collar slightly too large, clearly a downgrade to save money. His hair was disheveled, and there was no light in his eyes. He clutched the paper with his vase, his knuckles white. Chloe walked in from the other side. She wore the expensive, but ill-fitting wedding gown. Her makeup was thick, trying to hide the dark circles under her eyes. With every step, her high heels sank into the grass. She walked unsteadily, as if on a tightrope. Giselle stood to the side, holding a walkie-talkie, her expression cold and detached. She didn't play any music. The only sound in the entire venue was the sharp rustling of plastic decorations in the wind. "Begin," Giselle said into the microphone. Her voice echoed through the speakers, painfully loud. Mark opened his mouth, ready to recite his vows. Just then, the sound of screeching brakes came from the entrance. Several black SUVs pulled up. The doors opened, and a group of uniformed tax auditors and creditor representatives stepped out. They walked straight through the empty guest area toward the altar. The leader held a thick stack of papers. He walked up to Mark and, without any preamble, handed the documents to him. "Mr. Mark, due to severe financial misconduct during your project execution and your failure to settle all outstanding debts, all your assets are now under creditor control." Mark's vow paper fell onto the grass. He stared at the man. Chloe stopped abruptly, her veil blown aside by the wind, revealing her pale face. "What does this mean? This is our wedding." "This is a liquidation scene," the man replied calmly. "All venue fees, material costs, and planning expenses have been converted into evidence for litigation. Mr. Mark, please come with us now." Mark turned to look at Giselle. Giselle switched off her walkie-talkie and shrugged. "The contract is clear. In the event of significant legal disputes, I have the right to terminate services immediately and reclaim the venue to mitigate my reputational losses." Mark looked at the creditor, then at Giselle, and finally at Chloe. His body trembled, the shaking traveling from his shoulders all the way to his fingertips. Chloe let out a scream. She turned to run, but her high heels caught in the grass, and she tumbled into a pile of flowers that hadn't yet been cleared away. She struggled, but no one around reached out to help her. The flowers were crushed beneath her, releasing a rotten smell. I sat at the very back, quietly watching the scene unfold. No one noticed me because I wasn't needed here at all. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. Mark was being pushed toward the exit by the creditors. As he passed the large sign bearing their names, the sign, unsteady in its placement, swayed in the wind and toppled directly onto his head. He fell to the ground with a muffled groan. No one went to help him. Only the wind howled across the venue. I turned and walked toward the exit. I reached my car, opened the door, and slid into the driver's seat. I glanced at the venue in the rearview mirror. They were still there, piled on the grass like discarded trash. I started the engine. The car pulled smoothly onto the highway entrance. I took out my phone and permanently deleted the shared wedding schedule. The screen flashed with the words "successfully deleted." The sky over Los Angeles was still blue, the clouds hanging low. I rolled down the window. Warm air blew into the car, carrying a hint of salty sea air. I pressed the accelerator, merging into the flow of traffic, picking up speed. I didn't look in the rearview mirror again. Those people, those events, those absurd vows, they were all left behind in that overgrown field. I turned on the car stereo and switched to a light-hearted radio station. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my fingers feeling unusually light. Ahead lay the road to freedom. I drove fast until the wedding venue disappeared from the rearview mirror. That stone island, that meticulously planned event, the spotlight that was once meant for me, all of it had become their prison. I had won, not because I defeated them, but because I had chosen from the very beginning to walk away from that hypocritical game. I hummed softly to myself. The tires rolled over the pavement with a steady vibration. Palm trees along the roadside receded into the distance. Soon, I would step into a new life. No wedding, no deceit, no burdens.